So good afternoon or good day, and today we get to begin the seminars that are going to be part of this class. And so I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to run the show so that we can get to know a little bit more about the different groups of plants that we are going to see throughout the semester, or the different groups of plants that are going to be out there. And so we have a photograph of several sunflowers. I usually begin by showing you one of the more characteristics plants that belong to the specific group that we're going to talk about. And so this will entail be the family that will have the sunflowers and its close relatives. And so before we start with that, it's important to just talk about a little bit about the taxonomy of the plants. And so there's going to be a lot of plants out there, and all of them are going to fall into what is known as the plant kingdom. That is going to be separate from fungi, which are going to be part of the fungi kingdom, which is going to be separate from the algae, which is going to be a very different kingdom and a very different group of living organisms. So for our purpose, we are going to be talking about the plants. There's about 250,000 plus species that are known to exist in nature. From there, there's going to be some of the cultivated ones that we're going to be dealing with. And then there's going to be the hybrids and or the specific selections that human has made that have changed them a little. And they're going to be known as either hybrids or selected varieties. And you'll see a few of those other names. And so if we take all the plants, we can break them into subcategories to make it a little bit easier for us to work with them. And so underneath kingdom, you have phylum. And so the phylum is the next big order of groups of plants. And here as the example is Magnoliophyta, which means the flowering plants. So this will be now separating the conifers, the junipers, the pines, and some of the other seed-bearing non-flowering plants that are in the world, including the ferns that are even a little bit more primitive than those cone-bearing plants. And then next is going to be class. And for our example, this is going to be the Magnoliopsida, which is going to be what commonly referred to as the dicots. Later on, we'll see the monocots, dicots. We'll see some of the lilies, some of the agaves that will fall under the other category. So there's just two main groups of plants, the monocots, Magnoliopsida, or sorry, monocots, Liliopsida, or the dicots, Magnoliopsida. And then we have the order, which is going to be now the Magnoliales, which is going to now put them into a group of plants that have a common ancestor. So all of this evolved from a common ancestor millions of years ago. And as they became more modern, there was some divisions and there was some splitting, but they still have many things in common. They're still related to one another. And then we have the family. For our purpose, the family is going to be important. So you should be familiar with the family, because when plants are belonging in the same family, they are going to be so close related that they now are able to share diseases and or other problems. And sometimes you can even hybridize them if they happen to be in the same family. And then we have the genus, which is going to be followed by the what is known as a specific epithet or the species. In our purpose, the family is Magnolioaceae, and then the genus Magnolia that has, and then the species Virginiana. So genus or genera for plural, we're looking at about 13,900 in all the different plants. Families, about 552, more or less. They're still doing some more studies on the genetics and working out who's related to what. New families are being created. Old ones may have been lumped together with a couple of other plants, or they may have been completely destroyed. So keep that in mind. And then species of plants, we're looking at 2,000 255,000, just as an example. And so the botanical name is going to fall under the taxonomy. And so the botanical name of the plant is going to be made of out of the genus, which we have here, and the specific epithets. And the botanical name, the genus, and specific epithet is going to only apply to one single plant. And so, wherever you are in the world, if you are talking to people or if you read ingredients and you read literature, you can always decipher the botanical name of the plant and you know that they're talking about that specific plant only. Whereas common names are going to be different. There's going to be different common names in different languages, and there's going to be even colloquial common names. So the specific epithet and the genus is going to be very important. And I can just show you an example of when this can kind of happen. So I happened to be by a coffee bean, and they had some good advertisement that has a Jasmine Dragon Pearl Phoenix Pearl tea, which to a person that might not know about plant, it's a very innocent sign. But if we were to study the photograph, we can see some problems. So is it the best tea? Perhaps. So the tea comes from a camellia that has its origin in the mountains, either in Tibet or in China, and that's where it's still grown commercially. So there's going to be commercial operations where they'll cut the tiny leaves or the tips, and that's what's going to be made into the tea. Depending on the tea, there's going to be different types of processes. So it can be just dry or toasted, or can be fermented, and that is going to separate the green teas from the Earl Greys, from the English breakfast, and the rest. And so this is obviously a very important plant in Asia because it has been used for many, many years. But that is not the problem with the advertisement. Could it be the jasmine? The Arabian jasmine that was introduced into Asia from the Middle East, that is being used for flavoring the teas. Uh, if we look very close at the picture, we are going to see that what they are featuring as their jasmine, it's a plant by the name of star jasmine. And this is where the common name becomes a problem because star jasmine belongs to a family that has a couple of interesting relatives. For example, there's a plant by the name of suicide tree. There's also the common oleander and even the plumeria. This family is known as the dog bane family because it is very poisonous and it is very dangerous. And so, what I like to say is that there is no doubt that this is the best tea because if this were to have this star jasmine, nobody could argue because whoever drinks it will probably end up dying. And so that is why the botanical name is very important and the common name is not as much. Uh, as we progress through the lecture, I want to encourage you to memorize the flowers, memorize the different flower parts because we're going to see them a lot throughout this class. The flowers are going to have similar features. Not all of them are going to be the same, and that is what is going to happen as the plant evolve and they change and they became into their own. They may have changed their flowers. They may have changed the flower in response to the environment or in response to maybe a specific pollinator that may happen to be in the area. But if we just look at a generic drawing of the flower, we're going to have a couple of things. We're going to have the stem that holds the flower to the plant, and then we're going to have the receptacle. The receptacle is going to be a very important area that is going to give the plant the flower certain specific features. Number one is going to be the sepal. The sepal is a modified leaf that's sometimes going to be green, sometimes going to be colorful, but it has a very important job of protecting the valuable components of the flower when the flower is developing or when it's in the bud. Later on, it may play a different role, but that's going to be one of its major jobs for most of the flowers that you're going to encounter. And then there's going to be the petals, which can be very showy and very colorful. And those can also serve as a landing platform for some pollinators. But it's going to be more to show the insect, show the hummingbird where the flowers are located. And it's going to have some guiding marks to allow the animal to see the flower without having too much of a difficulty. And then inside, we're going to have the reproductive components. So the first component in the center of the flower is going to be known as either the pistil or the carpel, depending on what literature you're looking at. And that is going to be made up of what is known as the stigma. The role or job of the stigma is to receive the pollen. That is going to be followed by the style, and then that's going to lead eventually to what is known as the ovary of the plant. Within the ovary of the plant, the flower or the ovary may have certain compartments that will house the ovules that are going to be the eggs or the future seeds of the plant. So collectively, the stigma, the style, the ovary, and the ovule is going to be known as the gynecium, or for a lack of better description, is going to be the female component of the plant. And then on the other side, we have the stamens. The stamens that are going to be made up of two important areas. Number one is going to be the anther. The job of the anther is to produce the pollen. The pollen that will later, through the process of pollination, is going to be delivered to the stigma. And then that is going to be, those are going to be held by the filament. So collectively, the anther and the filament, they're going to be known as the stamen, or the rightful name is going to be the Andresium, which is, for a lack of a better description, is going to be the male component of the flower. So this is a generic drawing because the plant that we're going to see today is going to have some similarities, but also many differences. And then when we look at the two different groups that we talked about, the monocots versus the dicots, these are going to be two main groups of flowering plants. So they have a flower, but there's going to be a few features that are going to be slightly different. So number one, when you look at the flowers, if this was a species, if you look at the flower petals and sepals, on a dicot is going to be in multiples of 4 or 5 or multiples of that. Whereas in a dicot, it's always going to be 3. So 3 or multiples of 3s. So 3 petals, 6 petals, 4 petals or 5 petals would be a dicot, 3 would be a monocot. Dicot stands short for dicotyledon or monocotyledon, and the cotyledon is nothing more than the baby leaves, or what is referred to as the seedling leaves. Di meaning two, so in a dicot, when the seed germinates, the very first grouping of leaves that will come out are going to be two, usually a pair, and that is going to be the cotyledon. So dicot seedlings will have two seedling leaves, whereas monocotyledon, as the example of corn here, is just going to have one. If we were to take a cross section of the stem, we can also see some anatomical differences. The vascular system that is made up of the xylem and the phloem, or the vascular cambium as is sometimes referred, is going to be found in different areas on the different groups of plants. So on the monocots is going to be found in what is referred to as bundles, just clumping spread out throughout the stems. Whereas in your dicots, they're going to be found just behind the bark. The dicots are also going to have something that is going to be known as secondary growth, which is going to be a girth. And think about an annual ring. And that is exactly what happens. A new annual ring, which means a new grouping of this vascular bundle is created by the dicot trees. And that's what's going to give the stem some thickness. If we were to look at the leaves, the veins on the leaves can also tell you whether the plant belongs to a monocot or a dicot, because on a monocot, you're going to see that the veins are going to be parallel to one another. So they're never going to meet. So you can see it right here. Whereas the leaves on a dicot are going to create a net-like pattern. So you're going to have a central vein that will later branch into a lateral vein and even branch even more throughout the entire leaf. So it's a parallel veination or net-like veination for dicots. And the roots are also going to be different on your dicots. The central or the taproot, in this case, would be your carrot as an example, is going to be present, followed by some of the lateral roots. And your monocots, there's all the roots are going to be the same girth. Most of them are just going to burst out of the stem, but you will not have this division of a very thick taproot followed by several lateral roots that are going to have different girth. All of them are going to be exactly the same. And so with that in mind, we can then begin to look at the Asteraceae or the sunflower family. Keep in mind that the name of plants can change, and just the same with the family name. So the old name that you might still see it in some of the old books or some of the old literature is going to be the Composite, or now it is going to be the Asteraceae after the genus Aster. And it's going to be either known as the daisy family or the sunflower family. Both of those are correct. I heard them both. And then when you look at the map, you can see that this is going to be distributed throughout the world. So this is a very, very good and effective family in dispersing. And so it has literally found a niche in almost every habitat throughout the world. And so it is going to be a dicot. So it's going to have some kind of woody stem or some kind of stem, net-like veins, and flower parts in fours or fives. And then we're going to have about 1,600 plus genera, so different genus within this plant group, and about 23,000 plus species. This is a very large family comparing to some of the others that we're going to see. So this is going to be the third largest plant group. So I don't expect for you to know every single one. Most people who study asters or member of these families get really frustrated because it is very difficult to ID some of the wild species that you might see out there. When you just begin to look at a flower and a simple representative from here, this is what you're going to come across. So there's going to be some kind of herbaceous plants. There may be some shrubs. There's going to be maybe a few trees or arboreal type. So you're going to find a combination of all of those different plant groups or plant characteristics among the members of this family. So here we have, just as an example, it's a straw flower that has a typical flower for this family. And here's another plant. This is called Gazania. That also has a typical flower and leaves of this family. And here's just another assortment. So because they do come from a similar ancestor, they are very closely related. You're going to see that the flowers may look very similar. The color might be off a little, the size might be off a little, but looking at it, it's going to have a lot of the same characteristics. And so here's different genera within this family that are just showing you the different flowers, ranging from Gazania right here to the regular sunflower, Helianthus, to Senecio, and even our cosmos that we have here, or freeway daisy that we'll see later on. And so what we are having here is a grouping of blossoms. So this is not a flower. It is known in the rightful botanical terminology as an inflorescence. So it's a grouping of many tiny blossoms that collectively they create a much, much larger display. And so they don't have to spend a lot of energy in a big flower. They have spent the energy in a lot of little tiny blossoms, but put them together and it looks big. And so when we are going to study it and look at it a little bit closer, we're going to see a few other features. We're going to see a receptacle. That's where the little blossoms are going to be held. And then we're going to see the bracts that we talked about here, kind of greenish, acting as a protecting device. And then an area or something about the family that is going to be almost unique is going to be something known as a pappus. And this is going to be playing the role of a parachute. We'll see it later on because this is going to allow some of the seeds to be dispersed by the wind, and it's going to carry them to many different areas. So there's going to be some kind of fibrous that is going to be part of the pappus or that anatomy of the flower. And this is going to be known as a head or the head inflorescence. And this type of flower is going to be unique to the sunflowers. So that's the only plant that will have it. There may be a few other relatives that may have something different. But as far as the head type inflorescence or flower cluster, that's going to be a featured unique to the sunflowers or member of the sunflower family. And so when we look at now the individual blossoms, we are going to find two different kinds. We're going to find on the outer edge, we have the receptacle, and we have the different blossoms right here. We're going to find that at the edge of the head or the flower cluster, there's going to be what is known as a ray floret. Keeping in mind that because this is a grouping of flowers or an inflorescence, the individual blossoms are, the rightful name is a floret, and the common name is going to be blossom. So there's going to be a ray floret. The ray floret is going to be completely sterile, and it's just going to play a role of attracting the pollinator. And those are going to be found on the perimeter or on the edge of this flower cluster. And inside, you're going to have many of what is known as disc florets or disc blossoms. And those are the ones that will have the reproductive structures of the flowers, and those are the ones that will eventually become a seed. And so this is going to be common among the different types of sunflowers or members of this family. And here's just the ovary which will become the seed, the fruit and the seed later on. And so when we separate the two individuals, the two different types of blossoms, so here on the left, we have the disc floret that still has very small petals that we've seen before. We have the ovary towards the bottom, and then we have the pappus, the parachute. And then inside, when the when the blossom matures, and it's going to have a stigma that will be able to take the pollen, and it's also going to have the stamens that will give the pollen. And so that's going to be the reproductive blossoms for this plant. The ray florets are just going to have 5 petals, the 5 petals that you will find here that are going to be fused. They're going to be fused or welded together, creating one very long petal-like structure. But in reality, when you look at them anatomically, there's going to be 5 petals fused. And because their role is for attracting, there's going to be some reproductive structures, but they're not going to be functional. So they don't really have turned into a seed or anything. And so when you look at this cluster of flowers, here's a different plant. This is a string of pearls. And so you have the different blossoms, and you can see here the number of petals, and including the stigmas, the stamens, and the individual disc florets that are going to be towards the bottom. And so sometimes the disc may not be as showy or kind of maybe abandoned, but the other characteristics are going to be there. And so the pollination is going to be by insects and hummingbirds. So most of them are not going to be too specific. There's going to be a lot of the blossoms that will mature, and they usually are going to start maturing at the edge, and they'll continue on maturing for several weeks until they get to the very center. There's not going to be too deep of a nectary, so many insects, many flies, many bees will have no problem in taking the nectar from the blossoms and even carrying away the pollen. And in the process, that can bring about pollination. So we have a clear winged butterfly here. You can see the proboscis going into the individual blossom, as well as a bumblebee here with its mouth inserted into one of those blossoms that are mature. And then we have thrips. Thrips will play a major role in pollination of many wildflowers. And so you see a lot of thrips here on this flower. And then we have hummingbirds. So many thistles have adapted for pollination through hummingbirds or through birds. And so you don't see a landing platform, whereas you see here the ray florets become a landing platform for the insect. You don't see that here because the plant does not want insects to take the pollen because that belongs to a hummingbird, which is going to be the rightful pollinator. And then once the pollination is achieved and then followed by the fertilization, the egg and the sperm meet from the pollen and the ovule, then you have the production of the fruit and then the seed. For the sunflowers, their fruit is going to be known as an achene. It's a single seed fruit that is going to have a covering or a shell. And obviously the sunflower seed would be the perfect example. So you have the shell, and inside you had one ovule that got fertilized, and that became the one single sunflower seed that you see in there. The shell just protects the achene or the seed inside until it has a chance to germinate and grow. And when you look at other members of the family, you have an assortment of different achenes. Sometimes the shell is going to be kind of papery. Now they're going to rely on wind. And sometimes there's going to be some barbs. So the pappus is going to have maybe like a sharp barb, where in nature it would be attached to the fur of an animal, or if you happen to be hiking, it will attach to your clothing, and then it will drop off somewhere else where it's going to start a new baby plant. And or we have other smaller sunflower-like seeds, achene, or from pot marigold, we have this other achenes right here. So there's going to be a lot of diversity even in the seeds as far as the different members of the family. And the dispersal is going to be through different means. The most famous example is going to be dandelion. And there's a reason why dandelions can be found throughout the world, because they have managed to fly, if they're not by men, maybe initially by men, they were brought over from Europe, and then they figure out that they could just blow the seeds into the wind, being held by the pappus or the parachute, and then they can colonize every single area. And so you can find them in most of the world where people are living. There should be some dandelions around there. And so here is the dandelion fruits that are now ready to be dispersed. And so we have that achene right here that developed from the flower, and you can see the receptacle where each of those blossoms were before. And then you have the pappus, or in this case, it's going to be that parachute, that umbrella-like, that will pick up the wind and it will be carried somewhere else. And then you can see the bracts from now function is done, their job is done, so they're just now waiting for the blossoms to cease to disperse and the flower spike to then die off. And just here's a magnification of the different pappus. So we do have wind dispersal. We also have by animals. So this will cling onto the fur of animals, and or other wind dispersal here that will act as a parachute. And or the ones that are going to be have the barb. So this is known as beggar's tick. And if you see the tips, you're going to see that the barbs have or the tips have barbs pointing downward. So once they stick through your clothing, they're not going to fall off until much later, where you can brush them off later on. But they are meant to hang in there for the ride until the animal moves to a certain distance and then brushes them off, because it may be uncomfortable. And that's where the plant like wants to be. So it wants to be away from its parent and start a brand new individual. And here's where they have stuck and into the trousers. And so you can see how they can easily just go move around. Here's just some different genera, and some of these are going to be from the wild, and a few of them are going to be cultivated. So Mutissia is known as a climbing sunflower. This genus has its origin in the Andes Mountains. So here is a photograph from Ecuador. And in Ecuador, the high altitudes, one of the main pollinators is going to be the hummingbird. So this is going to be primarily pollinated by hummingbirds in the wild. And so it has a lot of those bright red colors and also very elongated trumpet-like shape that you see here. And here is uh, just the leaves, because when you get into higher elevations, you are going to have some kind of coat or some kind of jacket. And so many plants in high altitudes, because of the cold, are going to have a lot of hair that is going to insulate them, and it's going to keep them warm, or at least it's going to keep their temperature around the skin a little bit warmer than the ambient temperature. So here the buds, the tendrils, the leaves, the stem is completely covered with hairs for insulation. And here's the flowers. I mentioned we do have the bracts, but now we have a very long floral tube, or sometimes known as the hypanthium. And that is obviously going to be the area where the hummingbird will come through here and get its beak inside the flower to take the nectar from the back, and in the process is going to move the pollen. And so here's a close-up of exactly the same thing we saw. So there are many ray florets, including the ones out here, and there's going to be many disc florets, each one with its own stigma and stamens and all of that. And here's a different species. So this is only native to the Andes mountain, and obviously there's going to be some diversity there. So here's a different species, and you can see the different characteristics that we talked about before, including the pollen there. You can see kind of grains and the stigmas and everything else. And here's a different species, a little bit smaller, but a Mutissia nonetheless. And so in the world, there's going to be some microclimates or some niches that are going to allow a plant to find a nice grip in the area. And then as time goes by, they'll evolve to their environment. And that's how they're going to diversify and create a brand new plant that may look very different from anything else that you might come across. And so here's a close-up of this flower. So, and then also in very high altitudes, then you have what is known as the Frelingion, or the genus Aspaletia. And once again, this is in the higher altitudes, over 4,000 meters, in what is known as Paramo in Colombia, or it's going to be very high altitudes in the Andes. And this also creates a very strong selection pressure for certain plants, and the Frelingions are going to be the ones that manage to find a niche. And so they're only found within this area, few selected areas in the right height, and that's where you're going to find them, and nowhere else in the world do you find this grouping of plants. And it is an aster. So here's when I was able to take a photograph in Ecuador. And like the previous plant, it is going to be very cold. And so you're going to find that the leaves are also going to be covered with hair. And in this case, it will become somewhat of a tree-like. So we have the leaves that will remain attached to the stem for a while, because those will eventually create insulation for the stem, so it keeps them from getting damaged from the cold. And over time, the plant will get to a good height. Here's the close-up of the leaves. And you can see the different fur or the different hairs, and even the flowers during the bud stage, they are going to be covered with hairs to ensure that they do not get any cold damage or frost damage. And Here's the flowers, and you can see the fuzz and the hair. And there I am for scale. We don't do selfies in this class, so we only do scale photography. And so it shows you how big some of them can be and in the wild. Are they in cultivation? I am not aware of anybody. They like to be in the high altitudes. They like to the cold, which sea level here in Long Beach might not be the best suitable place. But there I am holding it. And there's going to be different types of Aspaletia. So some of them are going to be the arboreal types or the tree-like. Some of them are just going to be some kind of herbaceous plant. This one being a different species, similar characteristics, but now the growth habit is going to be different. And you can see in the background more of the arboreal taller brother sister. And here's the close-up of the actual flower, showing you some of the disc blossoms. And here's another species I was just showing you. A few other plants that grow in the same climate, same altitude, sharing the same environment, and same cold and everything in the same family. And this one I happen to have the ray florets and the disc florets, some of them already maturing. And in this case, we found a fly just walking around eating the pollen and the nectar, so that could be a pollinator if you wanted to. And also in a higher altitude, the higher you get, sometimes the plants are going to get very small. And so here is almost at the top of the second highest mountain in Central America, Volcan Tacana. And there's this aster right there. So now it's very small, very low growing to the ground because it's going to get cold. It doesn't have the hair, so the less that it can be exposed to the wind and the cold, the better. So they're going to have a very low growth habit, but they're going to be known for having a very large blossom comparing it to the rest of the plant. So you can see the flower here, or the flowers are going to be almost half the size of the entire plant. And so here we have the close-up. We see the ray blossoms, and you can see the lines that are in the middle. That's where the fusion of the different petals took place. And so that those are going to be the ray blossoms or florets. And then we have the disc. The ones that are open are the ones that are now receptive. They have pollen and nectar, and now the stigmas can be pollinated. And the ones in the center are still in the bud stage, so they'll mature at a later time. And so here is a close-up of showing you those blossoms in the center. And likewise, there's going to be a few other members of these families throughout. Some of them find niche in between rocks. Some of them may have more protection by a log that fell down. And so they're going to be very happy. And so here's some other members that we're able to see. And so when we look at the big family or a big family, sometimes it becomes easier for us to split it into what is known as either subfamilies or smaller groups. And so we have as a general plant family, Asteraceae, that is all the sunflowers members that are out there. But we can divide it into the three main groups, which is going to be the Eupatori, Chicory or the chicories, the Eupatoriae or the bloodroots, or the Asteroides, which are going to be the sunflowers. So it just makes it easier to understand because at some point when the original ancestor decided to diversify, then the ancestor of those eventually led to the different groups that we have right now. So they each of these subgroups are going to have a lineage back to a common ancestor that split from the very first ancestors that gave rise to the sunflowers. And so when we look at the first subfamily, which is going to be the Eupatori, we have here what is known as the mist flower. And so we have some of the pappus that are going to be here. Most of them are not going to have those showy rape blossoms. So that's those petal-like colorful things are not going to be found in most of this. So this is mist flowers. In California, which we have a very nice diversity of members of this family, we have a few shrubs such as Brickylia or bricklebush The flowers are not going to be as showy, but they're going to be in there in tiny blossoms. And here they are when they are already mature and being pollinated. Or we have another Brickhelia here with its flowers already open. Or we have stevia. Stevia, which has become very popular as a source or a sweetener. So yes, that is a member of the sunflowers. And yes, you can take the leaves from this plant and you chew them, and they are very sweet. And so obviously, as people are looking for alternatives to the sugar, especially if people have diabetes or some kind of sugar problem, then stevia could also could be a good source, even though it has a horrible and a disgusting aftertaste. I don't know why people use it, but anyway, it's a member of this sunflower subgroup, the Eupatori. And then the Cicatori or the chicory subgroup. Yes, chicory is going to be part of this family. So this is Cicorium, which is going to be the chicory genus. And that's going to be represented by a few species here in California as well. So this one being just the common chicory that you may find. And there's going to be milk found with members of this family. And as you learn more about horticulture, it is a very, very good thing that if you see milk coming out of a plant, that you should probably not eat it unless you're 100% sure that yours that is safe. However, people normally or people don't realize that members of the sunflower or many things that they eat when they are first cut, they do exude a milky latex or a milky sap. Uh, but they're completely safe, but you know they're safe, so you can definitely eat them. But otherwise, if you are dealing with unknown plants, please do not eat them unless if they happen to have a white milky sap. And so some members of the chicory subgroup will have a white milky sap that will come out when the plant gets hurt, or you cut it, or it gets some kind of injury. And so we have Soncus, which is the sow thistles. In this case, it is a plant that many people use for medicinal purposes. Perhaps at one time it was very important, but now it is unfortunately found a niche as a weed, and it comes out in many areas in many gardens. So it is not uncommon to see it. Most often is going to be unwanted. And when we look at the close-up of the head inflorescence, so we'll see the bracts, same characteristics. We'll see the different blossoms. In this case, many of them will have uh, functional reproduction structures as well as a much better display of the rays. So many of the inner uh, disc blossoms will also have a ray as well. So they could be quite showy. And then we do have a few more arboreal or larger plant. So here's Sanchus palmensis from the Canary Island. And so it'll get a little bit tall. And so this comes from a Mediterranean climate, very similar to California. And so this plant found a niche in the Canary Islands. And so it gets to be a good size and it will flower. And here's the close-up. And this is where you see the thrips that are feeding on the tiny, tiny blossoms, the pollen and nectar inside the blossom. And then we have Cerseum, which is going to be the different types of thistles. So the thistle group will fall under this category. Many native thistles as well as a vast majority that are going to be non-native. And so this is Cerseum. This is pink thistle, native to California. So this is a California native thistle. And we have some arboreal ones. Here is in the Mexico, in the Guatemala border. And so we have for scale a regular person, and then we have a very large, almost arboreal-like thistle, quite big. And then here is the tops where it was flowering, and I was able to get a close-up of the flowers so you can see it. So a thistle, probably in the genus, in that same genus or related genus, that can become a tree, or Taraxacum, the common dandelion, very, very effective in moving around, very effective in hiding, very effective in growing in many areas where you don't want it, but also very nutritious. It was very popular for eating back in the days, later on replaced by more of the modern day greens, but it still has a lot of vitamins, minerals, iron, and a bunch of other good things. Or Vernonia, which is known as bitter leaf, that is now being used for diabetes. And people are going to use plants or have been using plants to treat different ailments. And so it is now very popular around the neighborhood because many people are growing it for drinking a tea for controlling the blood sugar. And Lactucca, which is going to be the common lettuce. So the common lettuce is a member of the sunflower family. And Lactucca comes from lactose, meaning milk, because lettuce, when you cut them, they will exude a white milky latex. And so here's the leaf that I was able to make a cut on the main vein, and you see the white latex. If you don't see the white latex when you get them from the store, is because the moment they are cut, they are sprayed with a bleach solution that kind of puts it away or kind of removes the white latex from the plant. So you never get to see it. But if you ever harvested fresh lettuce from your garden, you probably saw it bleed the moment that you cut it. And so, yes, lettuce will have a white, milky latex or sap, but it's completely safe. But we know it's safe. Do not eat anything that you don't know. And if you let the lettuce, if you don't eat it and you let it bolt, which means you let it flower, then eventually it's going to produce a seed. So here is a lettuce that nobody touched and nobody ate, and it's showing us now its beautiful flowers, lots and lots and lots of them for one single plant. And obviously, once the flowers begin to appear, now the leaves are going to become a little bit bitter and it's no longer good to eat. But we can see here with the flower, it is an aster, it is a member of the sunflower family, and it falls under this category. And very few people have actually seen lettuce flowers because they usually get eaten before they have a chance to develop the flowers. And here's a close-up with the red blossoms and the disc blossoms and everything else in the bracts. And not all lettuce are eaten for the leaves. So here is a stem. So in Asia, there are some larger lettuce that will develop a true stem. And so some of those stems, they can be sold, or sorry, they are sold in the markets. And you can just chop them up and saute them like a regular vegetable. And you can eat it. It's not bad. It kind of tastes like a more like a crunchy type lettuce. And so here are the lettuce stems that are also edible and they're good for you to eat. And then we have the last subgroup, which is the Asteraceae, and this will become the sunflower. And this will be also the largest member of the subfamily. And so we have the genus Helianthus, or the sunflowers, primarily native to the North America. So North America has the largest diversity of sunflowers, or the genus Helianthus. Here's some of the annuals that come up in our garden every single year. So we don't even have to plant them. They have already naturalized themselves. And here's just a few other selections. The teddy bear that has been selected for having the different blossoms create a ray, giving you this fuller looking head flower cluster, and even this other teddy bear that is now completely almost ray blossoms out there. A few of the reddish kind or the bronze kind, and the colors can change from to reddish color as they go by, such as the one here that we've grown here as well. So different colors for sunflowers. And there's going to be annual sunflowers. So, sorry, perennial sunflowers. This is Helianthus. I forget the name right now, but it's a perennial, so it will grow every single year. Helianthus maximiliani, so the Maximilian sunflower. And so each year it's going to die to the ground, gets cut, but every single spring it will resprout grow back, give you flowers, send out seeds, and then die back to the ground. But it's going to be a perennial sunflowers that will keep on growing every single year, eventually becoming a big clump. And here's some photograph from around the neighborhood where some of the people have been growing it for now several years. And so there's going to be many of these perennial sunflowers out there. And this is the flower for Helianthus tuberosum, which is known as the sunchoke. It is a common thing to find in some of the fufu stores. So they sell this tuber that you can eat it. It's kind of crunchy, it's kind of sweet. But if you were to plant it, it will grow into a sunflower. And this photograph is when I took some of those tubers, put them in the ground, let them grow, and eventually they flower for me. I can then collect the seeds and grow some new ones. Or just plant the ones that you can get from the store, commonly known as sunchokes or Helianthus tuberosum. And then we have, obviously, for the sunflowers, we have the seeds that also played a major role for many different things. Obviously, there's a good enough seed inside that will have good calories. And depending on the selection, the seeds could be smaller or bigger. Some of the smaller ones might not be for human consumptions, but they might be for animal fodder or feeding, especially for bird mixes. But here are the kernels of the different sunflower seeds, which is going to become the, can also be uh, squeeze out, they can also squeeze out the sunflower oil. So yes, the seeds have a lot of oil, and there is an industry for having sunflower oil that many people prefer for doing different types of cooking, not a high temperature, or also added to salads and eat it different ways. So sunflower oil. And then here in California, we have Helianthus nevini, which is the Nevins sunflower. And this is native to the sand dunes. No longer do we have any sand dunes here in Long Beach, but here in Baja California, where there's still some decent, healthy sand dunes, this would be the normal habitat. So they were found throughout Northern California, but obviously the sand dunes are no longer here, and so they're all now gone. You might see it here and there in some of the areas where they may have refurbished or re-landscape, but to find them wild is going to be very difficult. And it is a perennial, very low growing because, as we know, there's going to be a lot of wind every afternoon coming from the beach. And you can also see another good characteristic is going to have kind of like a bluish, whitish, glaucous color leaf. And that's to protect it from the sun because obviously the sand and the heat and the sun is going to be very intense by the beach. And that's what's going to help the plant to survive. And then we have a few other sunflower-like. This is the genus Titonia from Mexico into Central and South America. It's known as either tree sunflower or it goes out by a different common name. And this is what they commonly refer to as Mexican hat flower, for a lack of a better name. And many of them are going to be very good for butterflies. So this would be another good group of plants if you were interested in providing habitat for butterflies and other wildlife. Then members of this sunflower family are going to be very, very important because the very tiny blossoms will be able to provide pollen and nectar for many, many animals. And so here we have the monarch that has his proboscis inside one of those blossoms, and it's feeding off of that. And then we have the genus Artium lapa, which is commonly known as gobo or burdock. It will be the English name, and gobos, I think, is the Asian name. And this is going to be a cultivated plant that has a very long taproot. And that is what's going to make the plant desirable. And people are going to grow it because they can eat the taproot as a vegetable. They'll chop it up into pieces, saute it with maybe sunflower oil, fry it a little, add some seasoning, and then voila, you have another very nice vegetable that you can eat. And here's just a different shot from the markets where they have many of those available. And then the genus Sinara, which is going to be the known as cardoons. And cardoons are going to be very important. Cardoons probably started as a wild thistle somewhere in the Mediterranean, somewhere in Europe. And cardoons are still popular with several dishes from Italy. So Italian are going to grow this plant because they are going to cut the petioles of the plant, so this thicker stem, and they're going to then chop them up or strip them, and they're going to saute them and use them as a vegetable. So somewhere in Italy, a wild thistle that somebody saw or found that was very good for eating the leaves was cultivated, eventually leading to the cardoon as a cultivated plant. As the plant kept changing and evolving in cultivation because of the influence of man, then that eventually became what is known as the artichoke. The artichoke that we have in cultivation is not found in the wild. It is completely a man-made plant. In the wild, we have some of its relatives, the wild, some kind of wild thistle. In cultivation, we started with the cardoon, and now we have the artichoke as kind of the final product. So somewhere in history, somebody figured out that instead of eating the leaves, or maybe in addition to eating the leaves, you can also wait for the plant to flower. And once it flowers, it also allows for an extra things to be eaten. If you don't eat the flowers, the artichokes will have a very beautiful flower. So here are the bracts that are protecting the valuable components inside. And here's the kind of bluish pappus from the sunflower, sorry, the artichoke blossoms as they are now open and showing you the beautiful color. And there's a different view with the bracts. Now, before it has the opportunity to mature, because once the flower from the artichoke has reached this point where it is now beautiful, now the pappus are going to be very hard. Now they're going to get between your teeth and it's no longer good to eat. So we need to harvest the artichoke before when it's in the bud stage. And that is what we have here. The artichoke that you purchase from the store is nothing more than that head inflorescence or flower cluster before the blossoms have a chance to mature. And so we have the artichokes here with the tiny stem. Here they are when they are found attached to the plant. Obviously, we have the bracts that we've talked about before and we've seen with some of those other plants. And there's the bracts. And then when you cut it open or cut it in half, we are going to see the immature disc blossom or florets. And we also going to see the receptacle of the blossom that we talked about before. And then we see the ovary and or what will become the seeds later on. And including the pappus that I mentioned, if this were to mature, that's going to get stuck to your teeth. And so when somebody is going to be eating artichoke, again, somebody found that the buds of the flower have a very big receptacle, and that is what they're going to be grown for. So we have the bracts that I get pulled. Sorry about that. The bracts that get ripped out of the artichoke. And when they get ripped, they're going to take with them a piece of the receptacle. And that is what people are going to then use their teeth to kind of scrape it off. And that's what you're going to eat, how you're going to eat artichoke. Obviously, before that, you're going to have to dip it in some kind of butter or sauce or some kind of dipping sauce. But that entails what you're eating from the artichoke. You are eating the receptacle of a very large flower cluster for the artichoke plant. And here they are when they're just either steamed or just cooked in a different method. And there's also deep fried artichoke. So if you go to Northern California, there is a town that grows almost all the artichokes for the entire world. So they are known as the artichoke heart of the world, or in California. And you can get all kinds of different dishes with artichokes. And I guess they also have the Artichoke Festival every single year where you can go sample different recipes with artichokes. And the artichoke is also used for medicinal purposes. So people have made teas out of them. And so here's in some kind of herbal shop where the flowers can be purchased for people to then manufacture their own medicine. Or we have another thistle, which is known as milk thistle. The milk thistle only because it has kind of milk stains or splatters throughout the leaves. It has been used as for medicine or medicinal purposes for many years. It is now grown primarily as a weed here in California because they probably brought it and it escaped, and now it's out there. So the milk thistle, here's just some different photographs. Or we also have the cartamus, and this is going to be known as safflower. And this has now become very popular because not too long ago there was the safflower oil that was supposed to be good for people who are watching their waistline or who wants to lose weight. And they were taking some of the oils from this plant because it's supposed to help with that. The other very good use for cartamus is for coloring. So they will take the petals or the petals that you see here, and they are often sold as an alternative to saffron. It will give rice or other dishes that golden yellow color that you normally get out of saffron. But because saffrons are very expensive, then cardamus has kind of become a good substitute. And so if you go to any of the Indian restaurants, if they're high class, you will get real cardamom. If they are the takeout to go places, you're probably getting safflower as the coloring for the rice and or the spicing of the rice. So here is the flowers that will eventually be used for that. And then here's the seeds, and it is from the seeds that they extract the safflower oil for watching your waistline or helping your waistline, thinning out your waistline. And here's just some of the oils. So it's been sold for cooking. But that's another use. And then we have a few other genera. This is Porophylum, and this is from America. And Porophylum has recently become popular because it tastes very similar to cilantro. It's commonly known as papalo. And so this kind of puts into question, we know that cilantro has its origin in Asia and it was brought over by the Spaniards. And so when they brought the cilantro to the Americas, the people then adopted it as a good flavor. However, before the cilantro, the Asian cilantro was brought into America, the people living in the Americas already had a very similar flavor or a plant that can also give them a very similar flavor. And so that was already known to them. They just simply changed the plant that they got the flavoring from. But Papalo, because of the movement of using more native plants, has become popular or has resparked its interest, and you will see it now available in a lot of the stores, the markets, whereas before you wouldn't even hear about it. So here's Porophyllum, and there's the flowers. It's an annual plant, and it will grow very well here. Or we have Coreopsis maritima. I know it has a new name. They call it sea dahlia. And we saw the tree sunches or sunkers before from the Canary Island, and we see a very similar in shape and form to this Coreopsis. And that is because they both come from a very similar climate, the Canary Islands, and here in Catalina, both from Mediterranean climate. And so these are two very different plants in the same family that evolved very similar life form, shape, and body because of the environment. So the environment does play a major role as to how plants react. And here's just two very different plants, very far apart geographically, and they look very, very similar. So here's the flower. They are edible. The stems are edible. The flower is just for pollen and nectar for the insects. And here we have Inula. This is from Europe. I wish it would grow here, but it's just too hot. And here's just a bumblebee that we have the flower photograph. Or also native to California, Areophyllum, or Areophyllum, one of the golden yarrows that is out there, or just a regular yarrow, Achillea. And here showing you a good example of a naturalized or a meadow type garden, because as we move away from having lawns, there's now the big movement to use alternatives to lawns, or even having like no more lawn or very, very low mowing lawn. And so certain ground covers that could lend themselves to that would be the yarrow or the Achillea that you see here at a local park, acting as a ground cover and still having some flower for the wildlife and still giving you color and creating that meadow-like feeling as you walk along this area. So keep that in mind, the genus Achillea or the common yarrow that we have here that is native to California, and it also goes into eastern United States. And then also to California, we have Baccharis. Baccharis, the coyote brush. However, the ones that you have here on the screen, these are Baccharis from Chile. Chile also has a Mediterranean climate. And so Baccharis also evolved there. So similar plants, different, same habitat, different geographical areas. They're going to behave the same and they're going to look very similar. So here is our native Baccharis, Baccharis salicifolia or mule fat. So you can see kind of similarities in both of them. So similar plants, different areas. Here we have Centaurea, the tecolote, or sometimes referred to as yellow star thistles. And the thistles are going to be hated because you can see out of the bud, there are very sharp spines or prickles and bars. And so if somebody's hiking, it's going to be inevitable. They're going to be poked by them, but it's going to be more of a concern for animals, cattle eating the plant. It is not native to California, it's native to Europe, but it was already brought here. It's already naturalized. It's found in all of the disturbed habitat where humans have stepped on, and it's a big problem. So it's a human blunder, and we now have to deal with it. So the genus Antaria, or a different type of thistle. We have more in the ornamental value. We have different types of Euryalps. We'll see more of those later on. Or from Mexico, we have the genus Dahlia. Here is Dahlia imperialis, or the tree Dahlia, growing in some of the South Coast Botanic Garden with its beautiful flowers. And or we have some of the more smaller annuals that can be used for colorful areas. And or some of the bigger dinner plate dahlias that are going to be out there. And here is just an assortment from a nursery, local nursery, where they grow many different types and they offer them to the public. And during the season, there's going to be very popular plant to have around the garden. Or the arboreal types. This one is the genus Montanoa. It's called Mexican tree daisy. It does have its origin in Mexico into Central America. And here's the image here in Long Beach of one of the larger ones that I've seen. And here it is when it's in full flower. It looks like a daisy or like a sunflower. And here's where the different blossoms are now ready for the pollen and the nectar. Or what I like to refer to as a golden cloud tree. So the genus Vigeria. There's only one tree to my knowledge here in Long Beach. It's on Long Beach and almost the Lamo, past the Lamo. I think it's Artesia. So here's the tree in the summer with just a few flowers. And when I took the photograph, and here's a tree in the fall. So many of these sunflowers that come from Mexico will tend to flower in the fall here in Southern California. So right now, it probably looks like this, loaded with flowers and also having a very strong fragrance, very similar to honey. And obviously, it's going to be loaded with insects and honeybees and a bunch of other animals feeding off of the pollen and the nectar. So here's very unusual to see this individual. Or we have another smaller tree, also from the Mediterranean, Poracium. This one from a botanic garden, and here's the flowers for that. Or we have Echinacea, this one from South Africa. Very small blossoms, but together, once again, they look very showy. But when you look at them individually, there's a lot of very tiny blossoms there. And or we have succulents. So we have the genus Senecio. Here's a string of beans and string of bananas. There's string of hooks and string of dolphins. And if you let them flower, this is the flower. So it is in this family group. So it has the same characteristics of the flowers as the other ones. And here's a couple of other different types of Senecios. We'll see a lot more, including our Dusty Miller or the Dusty Miller here with its golden yellow flowers, yeah, showing you that belongs to this family. Or we have the mini baby dragon tree, this one uh, right here that we have in the garden. And when it's in flower, you can tell that it's an aster. And here's the flowers for that. And you can see the pollen and the bees as they are taking the pollen and nectar. Or silver carpet, Diamondia from South Africa. We'll get to see it later on. Or as well as Artotica, another ground cover. And Bellis, which is the English daisy. The wild form is a weed. The cultivated showy form is a desirable, colorful plant. And here's the wild form that you may find growing alongside lawns, and it's often hated by people. And here's a close-up of some of those. Or a few others that have been used or grown for medicine, genus Matricaria. Feverfew would be a common name that is being used for ailments of the stomach, so the leaves, the flowers, and everything else. Or the pot marigold, calendula, which is also used for medicinal purposes. The petals can be added to creams, and they can be good for rash, and or you can also eat them, add them to salad, so they're edible. So in this case, the petals from the ray blossoms are going to be good and edible. And or arnica, which is useful also for medicinal purposes. It's going to be another plant that's going to be good for bruises. It gets added to cream for people who have bruises or scrapes, and it's a good plant. Or telegraph plant, here's Henrotika, another California native that is often goes by the wrongful name of telegraph weed. It is not a weed, it is a California native plant that is trying to find a place to grow. In this case, on willow and willow, spring and walnut or orange, spring and orange. It's just growing out of the crack of the sidewalk, and it's very happy flowering and flowering with profusely with lots of insects inside those blossoms. And that's also sold as a medicinal plant. Uh, and we have Bidens that we can also see later on, what is known as beggar ticks, some of the cultivated ones for a nice flower, also medicinal value for them. Or the genus Tagetes, the marigolds. There are going to be some shrub, woody individuals like the one you see here. When it's in flower, it's going to be a very nice display. Very fragrant plant if you happen to bruise the leaves. And there's also going to be one that smells like root beer, something known as sarsaparilla plant. Those are just common names, but there are different types of marigolds. And here's a couple of those. And the marigold that we use for color, we use as an annual color, and it has become very popular. in recent years because this is the flower of the dead, and after the movie Coco, which featured those flowers, everybody now wants it. And during the Day of the Dead, the Halloween, you will see it everywhere. And then the freeway daisy, there's going to be different hybrids now. Used to be one or two. Now you're going to find an assortment of different colors, all of them great for our garden and very, very good and colorful. Or the genus Centauria. These are commonly known as the Bachelor Buttons or one of the many Bachelor Buttons. So here's some of the blues and some of the dark purple that you may come across as well, and a few more perennials, and even the bachelor button here, the Chinese bachelor button, as is commonly known, with the different colorful flowers and all the rays and petals, or one of the bigger dusty millers, Centauria gymnocarpa, or velvet or lavender thistle right here with its nice, beautiful flowers. Another one from the Mediterranean that could get quite big around here, but it's worth it because of the flower. Or a farfungium, which are going to be known as a leopard plant because of the spotting on the leaves. These are going to be good for the shade or an area that has shade and regular water, but it's an aster or Rudbeckia here. So that's a nice annual plant for the nice big flowers. And cosmos, we'll see those later on. Some of the chocolate cosmos here, or just some of the white hybrid ones or pinks that you may come across. And or this one that is advertised as the breast cancer awareness flower because of the pink and the white, or the genus Xenia that we'll get to see later on as well. And so we have the very nice ray blossoms throughout, and then the very tiny uh, disc blossom, and some of them are already mature and they're open. So that's the size of the flower. And so here's a close-up of the different colors and a really close-up of the center, showing you the ones that are receptive. And then the straw flower, this one now makes its way from Australia. So here it is, sometimes available. In this case, the bracts remain very papery and hard, and they will remain nice as a dry flower, and that's why people grow it. And very good for butterflies as well. So here's the Gulf frilly butterfly as it's feeding on one of those blossoms. And then the Gerber daisies or Gerbera from Africa that has also become very popular either as a cut flower or as a landscape plant, either or. Many different forms are going to be out there and available. Or Echinacea, we know it's winter, we know you need a immune system boost, and obviously that's going to be Echinacea, where people will take some of the roots, they'll brew it into a tea or put the compound into a pill, and you can eat it or take it as an immune booster or substitute. And so here's the pink one. And in this house, there was all kinds of them. Some white, some pinks, and some red, and even some that are now multi-petal. So keep in mind, people keep changing, and new forms are available to the general public every single year. So I was surprised when I saw all of these varieties because I was not aware that Echinacea came in all different forms and colors and shapes, and they're almost now starting to look like a regular daisy. So here's a white with multi petals right here. And here's just the more standard, either the yellow or the reddish. And then Gynura, this one is the purple passion vine, very popular because of the hairs that are purple, and the flowers are going to be kind of golden yellow, good for butterflies, also for ornamental. And this one is Gynura procumbens, known as longevity spinach. And it's healthy, good for you to eat. So people will eat the leaves in a salad. And I guess the claim is that for every leaf that you eat, you are eating valuable components that keep you extend your life for a day. So the more you eat, the longer you're going to live. There's another very important one that is known as Okinawa spinach that is also has very good nutritional value that you might want to try. And so here is the flower for the longevity spinach, which is an aster. And here's a different form. And then one of the more common plants in the California floristic province throughout the coast is going to be the Insilia, which is known as the bush sunflower. So here's just an image showing you how many you have. So it's going to be a very dominant plant. And it was found here throughout Long Beach many years ago. And so here it is going out of Griffith Park. And the first photograph was from Baja, or even in the salt marsh. If you happen to go to Bolsa Chica salt marsh, or here in Long Beach, we do have a salt marsh on 2nd Street. We have Jamnea carnosa. So here's an aster that has a succulent stem in our body, and it's adapted to tolerate the salt in the ocean. So every single day, the tide may cover them with water, and then by the couple hours later, the tides will recede, and then they'll expose the plant. So salt is not a problem for them. So Jamnea carnosa, a plant that is endemic to the salt marsh or the marsh areas that we have or had here in California. And there's a side view. And then there's going to be Encilia, the desert bush sunflower, Encilia farinosa. That's the botanical name. And so here it is in the desert. And so now the philosophical question is whether or not to grow the desert sunflower here in California, sorry, in coastal California, because it is a native to California. However, when the desert sunflower is being brought in close proximity to the coastal sunflower, there has been some hybridization. And in nature, it would have not happened because of the difference in geographical area, but now because of the influence in humans of humans, there could be a potential problem with all the offspring being hybrids or having the genes of the desert and no longer pure California, Escherichia californica, as we know it. And so here it is. And every single year, or when we have good rain, you might hear about the bloom, the big bloom in California. I happened to go to Anza Borrego when there was a good year. And yes, a lot of them were those yellow asters, so yellow sunflowers that made the vast majority of those annual flowers or the annual blooms, with a few verbenas or abronias that are going to be there. And then we have the chrysanthemum, very popular, many hybrids. Obviously, chrysanthemum tea, so some of them are going to be used for eating. But there is a very popular chrysanthemum festival and even a chrysanthemum beauty pageant or chrysanthemum shows where the best of the best are shown and displayed and given awards and crowned as a number one. So here's when we used to decorate for the chrysanthemum festival at the Miller Japanese Garden in Cal State Long Beach or Long Beach State. So we used to decorate the area for them or the garden. And here's the beauty pageant where you have some of the best and the different types of chrysanthemums that are out there just to show you how much a plant can change because of human influences. And there's some of the better of the shows and even a chrysanthemum kimono that we have here. And so with the artichoke, I think it's about time for supper, and hopefully you have enjoyed the talk. So, and a few flowers, because those are definitely going to be something to brighten your day. So eat an artichoke and enjoy the sunflowers. And Day of the Dead, don't forget your cempasúchil or your marigold, because those are going to be the iconic flowers that fall under this category. So with that, I will stop recording and I will say thank you and have a great day.